The title of tonight's chat is going to be North Korea's Nuclear Threat, Illusions versus Realities. And we're obviously very delighted to have Dr. John Park here from Harvard Kennedy School, who's given us time out on his trip to Hong Kong to go through these issues with us. Needless to say, as you all know, North Korea is currently one of the world's hottest geopolitical risks. There was a piece in the FT yesterday which said it could even be worse than the Cuban Missile Crisis threat all those decades ago. We know that North Korea continues to launch new ICBM missiles, and the Pentagon expects more. Dr. Park will discuss the lingering illusions and dominant realities that make the North Korean nuclear crisis one of the most complex challenges for the international community. He will examine why the core countries, the US, China, South Korea, Japan and Russia, view the threat differently and how they are responding. He's promised me it will be a very depressing talk for Friday evening. I will condense Dr. Park's CV, but in a nutshell, Dr. Park is an Asia security analyst at the Harvard Kennedy School. He's a director of the Korea Working Group and adjunct lecturer in public policy. He was previously Stanton Nuclear Security Junior Faculty Fellow at MIT Security Studies Program and has previously directed a project on preparing for sudden instability in North Korea at the Harvard Kennedy School. Prior to that, he was in the world of banking and consulting, and he's considered one of the world's leading experts on North Korea. So we're delighted to have him. Could you please give a welcome to Dr. Park, please? Thank you.
Thank you very much, and for the warm introduction there, and thank you for having me here today. Speaking before a group of journalists, I kind of went overboard and came up with a grand title. It might sound cheesy, but the illusions and realities and all the things, as I ran it by my wife, she said, take it out, but I kept it in. One of the things to remember, though, is a quote that I'll kind of be referring to throughout the talk, and it's a saying from the US Army that between the terrain and the map, the terrain always wins. A lot of the developments right now pertain to the terrain, the relations between and among the countries, and predominantly the transformations within North Korea. The terrain has changed quite a lot, yet we see decision makers in the various countries relying heavily on maps, and these are, I think, outdated maps now. So the gaps that we're seeing, I think, lead to the type of policy formulation and the policy responses that in some instances are quite alarming. The 3 points I wanted to touch upon, the first is based on the recent event. The second ICBM test of a week ago, based on the altitude and the distance, technical experts are saying this thing can range the continental United States. The key context here is that North Korea's development is happening in an unconstrained manner. There is nothing holding back the North Korean pace of development right now. Sanctions, as we had hoped, are not having the type of impact in either slowing or stopping down this progress in terms of North Korea's ability to procure the items they need. And also now with the designation of North Korea formally as a clear and present danger to the American homeland, North Korea has been elevated in terms of a threat to the United States that I would argue is higher than terrorism right now. So it gives you a sense of both the urgency but also the rapid change in prioritization. The second point is to zero in on the sanctions piece and looking at how it has failed to slow or stop North Korea's progress here. In the research that my colleagues and I have done, there is something of a sanctions conundrum. In sanctioning the North Korean regime, there has been an effect, and this is a counterintuitive one, but it's really led to the North Koreans innovating on their procurement practices. They've gotten better. This is clearly an unintended negative consequence of applying sanctions, but if you view sanctions as antibiotics, the North Korean regime is exhibiting superbug traits. And in addition to that, which is alarming should be alarming to the international community, in addition to that, they have become better at doing business. And with all of this, as these policy tools and the heavy emphasis on sanctions is not materialized, it raises the probability of military action. And I want to make that clear that I'm not stating here that there's a certainty of U.S. military action, but rather the increasing probability of the use of military action because of the lack of other policy tools in addressing this issue. In the last part, I wanted to look at some of the core countries and look at how they're framing, evaluating, managing this North Korean nuclear crisis and go into a bit of detail. And at the end, save time, ample time for Q&A. So to start off with, this is a graphic that my colleagues in CSIS and DC put together. And it tracks North Korean missile testing, missile development over the span of the 3 Kim leaders. So for the 10 years of Kim Il-sung's period when he was active in this area from 1984 to 1994, you're looking at a situation where predominantly this type of shorter range ballistic missile development was geared towards revenue generation. North Korea was prolific in selling missiles at this time. In the case of the Iran-Iraq war, selling weapons to both sides. In the case of later on Iran, North Korea was one of the primary suppliers of missiles to Iran. That relationship has matured over time where it's no longer the client type of situation, but they look like partners in a lot of the joint development or sharing of technical information, where we see eerily this benchmarking and the co-development of their capabilities in the ballistic missile side. Under the 17 years of Kim Jong-il's rule, you're looking at a situation where more activity in different types of ballistic missiles, and now with the nuclear test coming online, more capable type of program. But what we've come to understand about the Kim Jong-il period was that there was something of a Kim family playbook, where you raise the stakes, you basically are able then to extract more concessions from other countries, and that seemed to be a pattern of behavior. This is, I think, the biggest source of a map that a lot of countries still believe that Kim Jong Un is following the father's playbook. And with that, because of this certainty that surely Kim Jong Un is doing that, even with this advanced state from a Chinese senior leadership perspective, I think the view of a nuclear ICBM, the idea is the United States calm down, Kim Jong Un's not going to use this, it's for self-defense, but it's also a notion of raising the stakes. You could get a higher price for a nuclear ICBM. So this idea that you can buy out the North Korean program and that this is a part of the brinkmanship for more concessions. But if we zero in on the Kim Jong-un period, he's been in rule for about 5 years. Extremely active. You're looking at a very different portfolio of types and capabilities on the ballistic missile side, but also additional nuclear tests. And I specifically draw your attention to the last bar here, which is 2016, last year. In that period, it's truly amazing in that short period of time, the different types of capabilities he's tested. And overall, the forward march towards developing this longer range ICBM capability, in addition to a 5th nuclear test where we're clearly seeing the increase in terms of the explosive yields of these things. Waiting to see more indications of a miniaturization of a nuclear warhead. But the overall progress is at a level right now where the Defense Intelligence Agency, a little over a week ago, said that they predict about a year until North Korea gets something that is considered to be a nuclear ICBM with reliability. That is a shocker because for about 20 years now we've been hearing the estimate of 3 to 5 years, over again 3 to 5 years. So for an organization like the IDEA to come out and say that about a year, I think that is something that is noticed by the North Korea watcher community. Now, earlier this year in February, we had something of an earthquake when it came to some of these revelations of North Korean capabilities. What you see here is something called the Pukguksong-2, intermediate range ballistic missile. But the key feature is, number one, this is a tank track vehicle. In North Korea, very limited roads, so for the wheeled mobile launchers, there are very limited spaces they can go. The ability to have tank track means that you go off terrain. This is something geared towards strategic surprise. You don't know where this is going to be deployed and where this is going to be fired from. Second feature is a Pukguksong-2, as we learned, was solid fuel. Going back to the Kim family playbook, Kim Jong-il was adept at just drawing out the fueling process, making sure that the satellites overhead saw it, raising the stakes, the concerns of the other countries, and raising the price as a result. Solid fuel means that you can launch this and you just are caught off guard. And with Pukguksong-2, certainly that was the case too. But the other feature of this is the bottom right-hand corner shows the different phases of the launch. And the early designation from those who study these things very closely that this is a Topol. Topol is a Soviet-era submarine-based launched ballistic missile. And the message from North Korea is that this is proven technology that they've adapted for land-based purposes. But something to signal that it wasn't experimental, it wasn't in development phase, that they were ready to go with this. Quick note here is that the amount of information and the certainty that we're getting from the community is not a function of breakthroughs in terms of intelligence capabilities. It's mainly by the fact that the North Koreans are filming and then posting these films and photos on the internet. the high resolution, very close in terms of the footage and so forth, so that the analyst community can look at it very closely and come to their conclusion that the technical improvements are in fact real. The other feature of this particular technology, I think, gives you the sense that North Korea has done this in a very short period of time. How North Korea is able to do this is still a puzzle. Different groups have ventured to guess. I would argue that when you look at the capabilities, the bottom half of the longer range ballistic missiles, no mystery in terms of the rocket motors and other booster capabilities, but the top end of these missiles, where it comes to the electronics and guidance, these are elements that is very troubling. In April of 2012, there was a failed long-range missile test. At that time, North Korea was very careful to frame it as a peaceful use of space program, but when this thing exploded a few seconds into flight, the South Korean Navy went out and salvaged the pieces, and putting it together, the top of the half found circuitry and electronics sourced to the United States, European countries, as well as Japan. So the puzzle, these were banned items, these are sanctioned items, and how the heck the North Koreans got it, very, very troubling. But if you look at that commercial aspect of unintentionally sparking innovation in terms of procurement, there were difficulties and setbacks for the North Korean regime and the 1% and the elite state trading companies. But as you see the increasing application of sanctions, local Chinese companies in particular see a business opportunity. Elevated risk doesn't scare them away, but it really becomes a basis of justifying higher commission fees. And so when you see this phenomenon of monetization of risk, that creates efficient markets where the buyers and sellers can align more readily, and for the North Koreans, is essentially renting the capabilities of these local players. There's also the other piece of the macro picture here. North Korea-China trade, this blue line here, has been growing dramatically and has actually spiked since the late part of the 2000s up till now. With this, for trade statistics to spike so quickly, this is not organic trade. This is really driven by political design. And there is, I think, a very strong explanation for this. But the other feature I wanted to draw your attention to is this is a dramatic spike, but you have to take in consideration this is based on published Chinese trade statistics. There is a view that the real statistics are even more dramatic, and this is something that the Chinese authorities have been very careful about because they don't want to be seen as coddling the North Korean regime. But the event that I'm mentioning is Premier Won Jiabao, then Premier Won Jiabao's visit, leading a very high-level Chinese delegation to Pyongyang in October of 2009. At that time, when Won Jiabao and Kim Jong-il signed 3 agreements under the headings of economic development, tourism, and education. At that time, that was all decided to be part of propaganda, really meaningless, window dressing. But as you see the wording of UN Security Council resolutions, the notion that member states of the United Nations are not prohibited from engaging in economic development and humanitarian activities with North Korea, it creates a loophole, a legal loophole. And under Chinese law, the purpose of this visit in many respects is signaling to those in China that it's legal under Chinese law to do business with North Koreans. And this is where I think you start to see the dramatic spike in the commercial activities. The other feature of this is, for a lot of North Korea watchers, the zooming in on the North Korean market and economy itself to see if there are any signs of improvement has been one that has been largely futile because there aren't dramatic changes. We do hear reports of the growth of what are called changmadang, these informal markets and others, but we're not seeing a system-wide economic reform and opening that people had anticipated. But if you do look at the elites and the 1% and their activities in China, that is a game changer. You're looking at a situation where these entities are living years on end in commercial hubs in China and Southeast Asia, and in doing that, they've essentially become businessmen. And so the story here is one of normalcy. If you are a national security professional without private sector experience, this kind of looks like a very sophisticated proliferation dedicated network. But if you strip out North Korea and were to present this to a chamber of commerce, it could be an Australian, American, any European company doing business in China. That's just how you do business. So for the North Koreans to be late adopters of these business practices, and now with funds from the coal trade, they're able to finance this proliferation and this type of activity. You're seeing the type of overall networks that are enormously advantageous to the regime. But one of the qualifications here is when you build out a commercial channel, the majority of the goods moving through that channel are actually benign. But once you build that channel to move illicit goods and small components that would go into the high-end components overall of a ballistic missile program or nuclear program, it's quite easy to move it through. And so hiding in the open is perhaps the most effective method that the North Korean regime has at this particular point in time. The other part of it is, if you define technology as a set of practices, these commercial channels are a dual-use technology because of this ability to use something that is, in most of the instances, benign for the illicit purposes later on. Now, to zero in on the superbug here, North Korea Inc., the collection of these elite state trading companies, have traditionally been used to either get funds for operating budget to fund the activities of some of the leadership's overall projects, programs, maintain the loyalty of the elites, and so forth. It's relatively recent that North Korea Inc. has performed this very specialized procurement activity. This is not to say that the North Korean regime didn't do procurement before. It's just the way they did procurement is different. In the past, you would see North Korean officials go abroad to the Middle East or to Eastern Europe and essentially go on a business trip. And in doing that, procuring item and going back to North Korea, very minimal or negligible business acumen, the development of business practices. But by embedding and living in these commercial hubs in China for years on end, North Korean officials have become North Korean businessmen. And the individuals from this elite group who have defected to South Korea, in doing interviews with them, it's really like a business school case study as opposed to a big security type of focused project. But understanding the processes, the partners, the practices, and the processes overall, I think gives you a sense of how the overall interactions between North Korean Incorporated embedded in China has become a phenomenon that is increasing the capabilities of the regime in a number of areas. As amazing as this may sound, this phenomenon is still grounded by a law of physics of business, which is profit equals revenue minus costs. In the past, North Korean state trading companies had a very difficult time managing their cost structures. They didn't have local partners going on these business trips. In many instances, they would be the victims of being ripped off. Where are they going to turn to if they're trying to procure a dual-use item in Eastern Europe? And so the cost structure sometimes became debilitating, but with local Chinese partners and acting as North Korean businessmen embedded in these places, the ability to manage and predict cost structure is a huge benefit for the North Korean regime and their activities. Shifting gears and zeroing specifically on China, it is important to note what China's been doing because of late we're seeing a lot of emphasis in terms of the role of China. And basically the U.S. view of China is not doing its job and as a result becoming more part of the problem than the solution. But the China role and the China factor is unique because the Chinese leadership is playing two roles right now. Through the party-to-party mechanism, the Communist Party of China, Workers' Party of Korea mechanism, there is an effort to rebuild the institution of the party. When Kim Jong-il was recovering from his health crisis and accelerating the leadership succession process to his son, the overtures from the North Korean sides and the overtures that were reciprocated by the Chinese side, we see a rapid rehabilitation of the Workers' Party of Korea. For the 17 years of Kim Jong-il's rule, he led the country, ruled the country through the military. And with the party atrophying, there was a need to resuscitate it very quickly, and the Chinese were very helpful in that manner. If you look at North Korea Incorporated and its embedment inside of China, it's really done through the party-to-party mechanism. And if you look at the conduct of relations between the two countries, North Korea is the only country where you have someone who is formally labeled as an ambassador, but someone who's really from the International Liaison Department of the Communist Party of China. That fact is usually not incorporated into a lot of analysis into the West because that is kind of seen as a legacy of the Cold War and something that, again, is a vestige, but really is more symbolic than anything else. In reality, if you strip that down, that's actually very critical because in the Communist Party hierarchy, the director of the International Liaison Department is ranked higher than the Chinese foreign minister. So when you look at the direct input and communication flows and so forth, having someone from the International Liaison Department as your ambassador in Pyongyang still serves an important function. Yes, the two leaders haven't met. I think there is a lot to be said about the animosity and distrust and the overall dislike that Xi Jinping has of this young kid, and it's probably mutual. But that doesn't mean that this party-to-party process is either halted or derailed or canceled. If anything, we see, again, the roots getting deeper. One part of this party-to-party mechanism that I think is important to keep in mind as well, that is an investment. There is sunk political cost by the Communist Party of China in this process. And I would say that in Beijing, there's a sense of confidence that this is the winning formula to having long-term stability, where you're stabilizing the regime, getting them on a track where they're focusing more on economic development. And the hope is organically over time, they'll be less interested in nuclear weapons for their defense and the long-term survival. But from a Chinese calculus, a big source of turbulence is countries overreacting to this nuclear weapons program, which I think at its core, the Chinese leadership views as a tool of getting a better bargain. Underwriting that, though, is a sense of disbelief among the senior Chinese leadership. How could the North Koreans achieve what China did so difficultly, which is develop a nuclear weapons program, a nuclear ICBM program? So I think that sense of disbelief still underrides more of this deference to the idea that North Korea is just doing this more for show and to get the United States back to the bargaining table and demand a bigger payoff. Now, with this, though, I think there has been an unintended negative consequence of the Chinese prioritization of stability through the party-to-party, and that is the six-party talks, of which China is the chair. Now, within that, there is still, on paper, the six-party talks agreement from September 2005, which is the roadmap for peaceful denuclearization in return for diplomatic and economic concessions. But if you're North Korea and you're receiving all of the benefits directly from the party-to-party with no linkage to denuclearization, why would you go back to the six-party talks, where there are concessions that are uncertain but contingent upon you giving up your nuclear weapons? So I think this is the part of the Chinese calculus that clearly is unintentional, but a big reason why I think the wins out of the sales of the six-party talks has been ongoing. Now, if you look at the other countries, I wanted to draw your attention to the United States. For the United States, no denuclearization, no economic cooperation, nothing in that area. But it's the relative distance between China and the United States here that creates enormous space for the North Koreans to do what they're doing, and they're going to continue to do that. And so with this type of situation, you're looking at the type of overall Chinese gap here that is done for internal calculations with a longer time frame. But for the North Koreans, it really becomes a basis of North Korea's China policy. I think we look at it from the various countries' North Korea policy, but North Korea has a way of calibrating and dealing with all the other countries and reading the concerns of China and using it as a way to create this kind of leverage for itself. I think North Korea has taken advantage of the situation very well. Now, if you turn to the other countries, and to wrap up, looking at how the other countries are framing, evaluating, and managing this increasingly complex North Korean nuclear issue. If we use the actual name of the Trump administration's North Korea policy, which is maximum pressure and engagement, you can kind of plot it in terms of the various countries. So clearly for China, much more on the engagement side, although it is signed up and has pledged to adhere by a sectoral ban. So the Chinese have now committed to not purchasing North Korean coal for about 12 calendar months. You're still seeing a lot of engagement in terms of what's happening in the Chinese marketplace. And with this, the other countries, you're seeing kind of scattered around. But the United States here, it's all maximum pressure, irrespective of what Secretary Tillerson said, about notions of negotiations potentially on the condition that North Korea commits to denuclearization. That is treated more as an outlier. The core focus now for the United States is different tools under the heading of maximum pressure. So yet again, I draw your attention to the relative distance between the United States and China. Wherever you see space, wherever you see a scattered type of situation, just think that is advantageous for the North Korean regime. And with this situation, you're looking at North Korea conducting these type of tests, feeling that they will get away with it. Again, this notion of an unconstrained nuclear weapons program. Right now, there is an effort that's stalled to get another UN Security Council resolution with more sanctions in the response to the first ICBM test, but it's still kind of stalled. So it gives you a sense of how these measures in response, something that had been quite standard in the past, are becoming more difficult as well. I'd like to conclude with the North Korean name of their plan. So the North Koreans have what they call Pyeongjin, which is the parallel development of nuclear weapons and developing their economy. When it was first unveiled, it was considered a joke. And so that was not given much credence. But if you look at those two areas, on the nuclear weapons development side, they have made progress. In April of this year, April 15th, and the Day of the Sun parade, a big military parade, the North Koreans put on display different types of ballistic missiles. The North Koreans have tested every single one of them, and they posted the videos and the photos afterward, and most recently the ICBMs. So this idea of signaling and messaging, the North Koreans have been doing it pretty consistently and been very transparent about it. They've been very helpful in posting these videos and these photos as well. On the economic development side, people again look inside of North Korea and they don't see that coming to fruition. But here I would mention to the group again that you have to look at the North Korean 1% and what the regime is doing inside of China. And you get to see how Pyeongjin is very much a forward movement type of situation. And the sense of euphoria in the Kim regime right now is pretty high. The sense that they're on the cusp of making history. Never has a country that is not a great power possessed a nuclear ICBM. A nuclear ICBM is really very much in the domain of great powers. Pakistan and other countries are regional nuclear powers. But to have a nuclear ICBM is something of the red line. This is the Rubicon. If North Korea does go the full route of nuclear ICBM, the U.S. calculation is there is no room to wait to see how the nuclear posture and strategy comes out of Pyongyang. There are those who say that Kim Jong Un is not suicidal, that this is for self-defense, and the United States shouldn't overreact. But again, who's going to take that gamble? Because at the end of the day, there's a 33, 34-year-old boy, as some people like to refer to him, with an unknown track record. And to have that type of individual in possession of a nuclear ICBM is a gamble that no one wants to take. And if you look at the imagery of it, it's literally like two trains on a track headed towards each other. So that's a part that I've been trying to give a lot of thought. How could we have a diplomatic off-ramp or some aspect of slowing it down? And I have not come to anything that I think could be plausible or effective. So on that happy note, I'll take some questions.
Thank you very much, Dr. Park. You promised it would be depressing and you didn't disappoint. So we will take questions from the audience, and please do raise your hand and say your name. But perhaps if I could kick off with, just to get things going, you mentioned that there's a certain sense of disbelief among China's leadership and a sense of puzzlement about how North Korea is getting the technology for the top of these missiles in particular. Can you elaborate on your thoughts on just how they are managing that, given the sanctions and the other controls on North Korea? I mean, where are they getting technology and who's likely assisting them?
Sure. So foreign companies are setting up and have been setting up production facilities inside of China, and not for the old business strategy of taking advantage of cheap labor there and then selling those products in their home markets and pocketing the savings and having large margins. Those days are long gone in China. But for those companies, it's very much a part of a longer-term corporate strategy to have a foothold in what many are believing will be the world's largest market. And so with that, you have companies that are producing the products at the same sophistication of product levels in their home markets and selling it into the Chinese marketplace. This has nothing to do with North Korea. The North Koreans didn't plan this. The North Koreans aren't a part of this. But they are the biggest beneficiaries of this phenomenon. So for the North Koreans to go across the border, identify and select a private Chinese company, pay that Chinese company at the end a commission fee and the amount of money for the procured item, that Chinese company can go to, in the instances that we've seen, to a German company and purchase dual-use industrial equipment. Chinese company fills in all the forms. And so end user, all of that, the German company truly believes it has sold something to a Chinese company. In reality, that item will make its way to North Korea. And in many cases, it's through small boats and ending up in Nampo, a very active port on the North Korean side. So this type of business approach, everything up till that point of ending up in Nampo, again, is the exact same way that any foreign company operating in China would operate. So this is a part of being extremely effective by hiding in the open and doing business like everyone else. It's hard to detect this. And so when you look at this type of activity and the use of more capable and better connected Chinese companies, this is a big part of this pipeline, this channel where the components that eventually go into the missiles, it's a reliable source. The question is, have the North Koreans stockpiled them in anticipation of harsher measures like more drastic closure of the border, if that is possible, or this idea that they are going to use that opportunity of stockpile to focus on essentially creating an assembly line for an inventory of minimal nuclear deterrent, which would be something roughly in the ballpark of 100 ICBMs. So this is a part where if they haven't, then I think there's still room to try to break up some of these business networks in China by targeting the Chinese players. In the midst of all of the elevated tensions, the Chinese authorities are still very, very hesitant in going after the North Korean. These are diplomats formally who are using diplomatic credentials to embed themselves in China for years on end and do this type of business activity for the concern of offending and triggering a hostile North Korea. So with that, that is a bedrock formulation from the Chinese authorities. They're unlikely to budge on that. But if it is framed as going after Chinese nationals who are engaged in criminal activities, I think there is the last chance of trying to slow down the program through these means. But it's something to definitely prioritize and work very quickly at. But this is something that, as far as I know, hasn't really been prioritized in terms of cooperation from other countries as well.
Thank you. Okay, first question.
Hi, John. My name is before my name is Ted Lippman. I should probably preface by saying I was the Canadian ambassador to North and South Korea, so I've spent quite a bit of time in both places. And one thing I learned is that the North Korea, well, we often, when we look at these situations, we don't talk about how people feel about each other. And I think that really needs to be included in the calculus of how the situation is going to play out. And my experience is that the North Koreans really don't like the Chinese very much. And that the Chinese look down on the North Koreans. And that the South Koreans, they don't like the Americans very much. And that the Americans kind of tolerate the South Koreans, but they don't have much choice. I'm reminded of the comment by the French, you know, I love Germany so much, I'm glad there are two of them. And I'm just wondering, a united North and South Korea presents a huge threat to China economically and otherwise, as it does to Japan. And I don't think it would be in America's interest either. The one thing the North and South have in common is that they both aspire to a united Korea. So with all of these, let's say, feelings in play, how does that fit into the calculus? In other words, the motivations behind what people will do to achieve what seem to be very conflicting goals.
Sure, I think that's a very complex set of situations, as you mentioned. But zeroing in on the unification piece, during the conservative government in South Korea, unification was viewed as the answer. Through unification, you could finally get rid of this nuclear issue and work towards more durable peace in the Korean Peninsula and the region. But the sentiments and the historical legacies, there is an interesting amount of historical baggage that each of these countries have. But on the China piece, in principle and formally, they support unification. But the conditions that they've laid out make it very unrealistic. So a unification where it's a gradual process where the two countries, North Korea and South Korea, are consenting to the process. The second feature is that more or less China would be consulted at every stage. And the third, that it's done on a peaceful basis. So the conditions laid out, it's very unlikely we'll have unification that way. But in principle, the countries in the region have all supported the idea of unification. It's just how it will come about that folks are concerned. That the idea in the aftermath of a sudden collapse of North Korea. So it's something that on paper, again, it's a talking point, and all the countries and world leaders would talk about support for Korean unification at some point in time. But every country has a different qualification in terms of how they would like it to see come about.
Next question.
Hi, John Lyons. Your theory on how North Korea has procured the technologies to speed up its missile program is really interesting. Could you talk about how they seem to speed up in the know-how area as well?
Yeah, so the nuclear side is a little more well-developed and substantiated. During the Cold War, the North Korean nuclear technicians went to a facility called Dubna, just outside of Moscow, and they were trained there. So the father of the North Korean nuclear weapons program was trained there, as was a small group of them. They in turn came back to North Korea and they trained the next generation. We're probably at about the third generation of these nuclear developers on the North Korean side. On the missile side, the view is at the end of the Cold War, where you have the end of the Soviet Union, all of these technical experts on the missile side from Russia essentially being guns for hire. And so there have been allegations that the North Koreans paid some of these individuals to come to North Korea and essentially helped build out assembly lines for the rocket components. And a big part of what North Korea is able to do with their rockets now are based from that, legacy of that, but also the innovation and resourcefulness of the North Korean technicians themselves, the rocket technicians. The ICBM, the rocket motor there is deemed to be something that the North Koreans developed based on that earlier technology. So you have this kind of influence from abroad, training in the nuclear sense, but the indigenization and the training of a whole apparatus in North Korea that is in-house. When it comes to the sophisticated electronics and other components, those are sourced from abroad. And if you look at it, the traditional model of nuclear weapons proliferation, countries have built out massive, very expensive military industrial complexes. In the case of North Korea, they did that for certain components, but when it comes to this high end, they're sourcing it from the international marketplace. It's pretty cost efficient. And also they're able to source from a number of different areas as well. So I think it gives one of the explanations of how the North Koreans have been able to do this pace of development so quickly. I remind the group again, North Korea did their first ICBM test on July 4th and their second last Friday. So the pace of it is startling to begin with, but there is something of human nature. I think we've grown accustomed to these type of actions, and the notion of the bar in order to be concerned is getting higher and higher.
Hi, Ted Kavoris from Panoramic. How does the assassination in Malaysia play into this? Because that was really out of character. And it's worth noting that they had to wait until he was outside of China, not to offend China.
So that's I think the source of any of the journalists here who want to write a book. That's a fantastic thriller there. But in terms of the details, I kind of look at it a different way. The North Korea-Malaysia commercial relationship is one of the oldest that the Kim family has had. And Kuala Lumpur was a very active hub during the AQ Khan nuclear commerce days. And North Korea was a big player in that international network as well. So if it in fact was Kim Jong Un and the North Korean regime that ordered the assassination, to anticipate that the Malaysians would cut off that commercial channel, I think is an interesting calculation if that in fact was the case. To me, that's a sense of optionality. It's no longer that important. To me, that would show that the commercial channels that the North Korean regime has built inside of commercial hubs in China are now very viable, so that they can burn the commercial channel with Malaysia. So that's troubling from that perspective. This idea that the North Koreans now can literally, again, one of the most durable and one of the most trusted and effective commercial channels to basically sacrifice it. Just to end on a couple of points here, one of the largest, if not the largest embassy in Pyongyang has been the Malaysian embassy. And a large part of it is just to facilitate this flow of commercial activities. Chang Song-tek's nephew was on the other end of that particular node of the North Korea Inc. activities based out of Kuala Lumpur. So you have the closest lieutenants of Uncle Chang Song-tek being the creator and the CEO of North Korea Incorporated, these very elite state trading companies. So you get to see how important the Malaysia connection was in that commercial sense.
Doesn't that illustrate the desperation?
Desperation or confidence that the other channels are stronger. So there's a lot of ways you can slice it and dice it.
Hello, my name is Pia Kaspersen from Danish media. I just wonder, America's president, Mr. Trump, has constantly, more or less every day, he's been blaming China for not doing enough to stop North Korea. And I know you have talked a bit about it as well, but I just wonder, what are the options actually for China? And if they have options, why don't they do anything?
Sure. You know, the Chinese ambassador to the UN a few days ago had a press conference in direct response to these tweets and statements coming from President Trump. And he just reiterated a very consistent message from China, which is this is not China's problem. China does not have the responsibility of solving this. This is between the United States and North Korea. And China will always be there to support a diplomatic venue or encourage diplomatic breakthrough, but putting the onus on not just the United States, but North Korea and the United States. China's been very consistent in that formulation. And you know, certainly they feel the pressure of not only the United States but other countries when they say, China, you are part of the problem now, you're not a part of the solution anymore. But you know, that doesn't hurt Chinese feelings. I think if anything, it's their view of they launched the six-party talks, they operated the six-party talks, they have supported any number of bilateral configurations, hosted Japanese North Korean talks in the prelude to the 2003 Pyongyang Declaration, all of these things. So for China, they have a track record, and for them, you know, that's something that they're very proud of as well. But even secondary sanctions, which is now the big focus, to sanction big Chinese banks and big Chinese companies in a way to get finally the Chinese authorities to do more, that is not going to be fruitful. And the Chinese don't see it as you know, more economic pressure and then suddenly China is going to be helpful in resolving this issue. There's also been talk about, surely this is a big problem for China. Why doesn't China coordinate with us, the United States, and militarily overthrow this young kid? That is the furthest from the reality of what I understand of China. You know, China, if anything, is a good student of what happened for the United States in Iraq and Afghanistan. And so their primary principle of foreign policy, non-intervention in the affairs of other countries, it's this idea of it's costly and it's distracting. And on top of that, they have one belt, one road. So the game plan for the Chinese, I think, is one where they're going to stick to their guns. And as I mentioned before, the Chinese leadership feels they have the winning formula, what I refer to as Beijing's sunshine policy with Chinese characteristics. And in building up the Workers' Party of Korea and creating this type of DNA of what the Chinese are doing on the economic front, these are sowing the seeds of a future type of North Korea they would like to see. So a quick point here, too. There are these thoughts that if the North Korean regime to suddenly collapse, that would be the basis of unification. The Chinese don't see it that way. They would prop up whatever group, and likely a group that they had supported and known and had connections with, and prop that up as the successor regime, the new leaders of the Workers' Party of Korea and the new leaders of the Korean government. So we're not going to easily see North Korea disappear, even in the aftermath of Jong Un, this current Kim family member. So this is a part of a Chinese game plan, again, I think has been very consistent and transparent. This isn't a state secret in China, but gives a sense of if you're going to go this route of trying to humiliate or put public pressure on China, good luck.
Here in the middle, please.
Hi, Dan Ted here with Bloomberg News. Just to flesh out that depressing scenario at the end, how do you see, what do you think would trigger a war, first of all? And how do you see that playing out? Do you think, you know, a limited strike is even possible without triggering World War III?
So I have to caveat by saying I'm not a military professional, but I've been hearing a lot from those who are, you know, most recently retired at pretty senior levels. There's a beginning thesis that we have to take out the ballistic missile development and testing sites and the nuclear facilities. So take out the nuclear weapons program, and that would be a surgical strike. And the signaling to North Korea, hey, this isn't a general invasion, don't retaliate, we just want to take out these sites. Don't overreact, right? And then signaling, giving a heads up to the Chinese as well. We're going to send in fighter bombers and others, you know, stand down. You know, Xi Jinping, if you give us a window of a couple hours, we'd be really grateful. The probability and the likelihood of escalation is really high right now. Because if you look at the current formulation, North Korea has a clear and present danger to the American homeland. Taking out those facilities is now a serious consideration before North Korea has a nuclear ICBM. Because the thinking is, once a country has nuclear weapons and you attack them, there's a high probability of nuclear exchange, nuclear war. So the idea of a window of time, so you get this sense of urgency. And with this cognitive bias that North Korea is a joke and North Korea is doing it just for the playbook and getting more money, I think successive presidents have kicked the can down the road. And also, if you look at the majority of the analysis, my understanding is that it's focused on the weak state of the economy. So 3 to 5 years' time, the North Korean regime is going to collapse. It's not viable. So if you're a senior American decision maker, why risk escalation and fighting when you can just, time is on your side and just wait them out and let them peacefully, quietly collapse? So that, I think, has been the basis of feeling good about kicking the can down the road and seeing that as the most prudent thing to do. And now we're at this position where literally the window, that sense of panic as this window gets closer and closer, and North Korea's already done 2 ICBM tests. This is the state of, I think, national emergency, right? Now, if you look at some of the options, the ballistic missile defense. So for the boost phase, you have essentially Aegis, naval-based capabilities. The Japanese, South Koreans, and the Americans have it. But it's really only the Japanese and the United States that have the interceptor missiles. The South Koreans decided not to buy that. The logic there, it just doesn't sink in. But you don't have a fully viable, as potent of a ballistic missile shield as you could have. But once you miss that boost phase, though, then you're relying on ground-based interceptors in Alaska and California. The problem is, at its core, those are still systems in development. They're still being tested. A large part of these ballistic missile defense programs, it's euphemistically called the son of Star Wars from the Reagan administration period. And there have been technological improvements and whatnot, but government agencies in the U.S. who assess these tests conclude that they're not done under realistic circumstances. So we'll really know if they work or not when they actually try to intercept. So that I think gives a sense of more panic as well. And this goes back to the notion of, well, if we're going to use military, the option, we have to be certain that we're going to take out the totality of the program. And doing surgical strikes, no one can say, yes, boss, that's 100%. So this is where now there's a big focus on something called decapitation, take out the regime. But as decapitation gives, I think, a false sense of it's very surgical, it's from this part and above. But in reality, the idea is you take out the whole body, right? So if you look at the target list gets very long, and you're doing things in a surprise fashion, you need the element of surprise. So I think we've gone to this process through these different thought experiments and looking at different examples to a situation now where the view is, well, we're going to have to use massive force. And we're going to have to try to make this as devastating and as quick as possible. And that's where you kind of reduce the potential of a North Korean response or retaliation. So you go from surgical strike to essentially something that looks like general war. Right? And that's where we're at. And the statements coming out of the United States, so General Dunford, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs at Aspen a little while ago, said that it's not unthinkable to use military force on North Korea. What's unthinkable is for the United States to allow a nuclear ICBM from North Korea to hit Denver. Now, that caused a lot of confusion and concern in Seoul because that means, what about us, right? So this is a part where the prioritization of the American homeland and the security of the American homeland is upsetting a lot of understood truths. The idea that the United States would defend Seoul as if it were Los Angeles. Now the view is, in order to protect the American homeland, collateral damage over there, as Lindsey Graham said, is acceptable.
You just used the phrase senior American decision makers. To what extent is this entire situation being made worse? Because it's not clear who is making the decisions. Is it the White House? Is it state? Is it the Joint Chiefs?
So I personally think we're very fortunate in having these generals in place. These are combat generals. They're not generals who are promoted in peacetime, where the use of force is considered more of an option. These generals know the consequences of using force. And this is where General Mattis, Secretary Mattis, has said that it would be devastating. It would be tragic on a historical scale. If you do look at this idea of massive force as quickly as possible, this is the team that could get it done. But, of course, the question marks about President Trump. So, with that, you got to hope these generals, they're our last line of defense, really, and making sure that this is done in a way that if the decision is made, the notion that they've literally exhausted all other options, and if they're going to do it, they're going to do it properly.
Quick follow-up.
Sure.
Do you think the generals maybe have some secret toys they want to try out?
Not these generals. These generals are a different breed.
On the back on the left. Okay, go ahead.
I'm Ko Hanshi from MLEX.
Apparently WikiLeaks leaked out a transcript of a talk that Hillary Clinton gave when she was state secretary to Lloyd Blankfein and Goldman Sachs. And then apparently that leaked document, Hillary Clinton basically supported North and South Korea, saying that a separate North and South Korea is good for both China and America. Would you agree that she had those views, and would you support that view?
I'm not familiar with the exact wording of that. I just know that she gave a talk to Goldman Sachs a few times and made a lot of money. But with that, I think status quo is appealing to a lot of countries. Status quo is something, again, the devil you know. And I think in the case of China, China, as it grows economically and militarily, there's a confidence among the Chinese leadership that they have more tools that they can apply to this instability variable. So it becomes almost like a risk management exercise. But one thing that the Chinese leadership will not entertain is uncertainty. There's no mathematical formula. There are no tools that you can apply to that. So to use a business analogy, I would argue that for about 3 days in the United States in 2007, the United States government lost control of the economy. It was in complete free fall. And it took $800 billion of TARP to slowly restore. And it was really Warren Buffett and the strategic investments that he made that started to turn around sentiment. There is no equivalent of TARP in international security. So there is no bankruptcy and then you resurrect another company. So that's the part that I think a lot of the countries, as they think of the situation, suddenly status quo is preferable until there's a better situation later on that could affect some more peaceful type of coexistence and then perhaps confederation or unification.
Do you think the Chinese government will be able to identify them if they want to?
Absolutely. So September of 2016, the Wall Street Journal, New York Times did a good story on Tandong Hongshang. And the CEO there, Ma Xiaohong, was eventually detained. And from my understanding, it took a bit of time. And one of the reasons why is as the anti-corruption apparatus, Xi Jinping's anti-corruption apparatus was vetting her and investigating her, they had to make sure that she wasn't somehow tied to Xi Jinping. So once it was ascertained that she was a part of the Hu Jintao group, gloves come off, she's detained. So it gives you a sense of the political nature of these type of relationships. In that instance, she happened to be both a local party delegate in Liaoning as well as the CEO. So in one individual, you have the two capabilities. But she was charged. So first off, in Western media, it was framed as someone violating sanctions and being punished for that. In Chinese media, it was framed as a corrupt party official engaged in criminal activity and being punished to the full extent of Chinese law, different narratives. Now, unfortunately, the Treasury Department soon after that decided to apply secondary sanctions on Tandong Hongshang. Secondary sanctions, from a Chinese perspective, is a violation of their sovereignty. That's the insistence of the United States to implement their laws in Chinese jurisdiction. Chinese are never going to abide by that. And so, unfortunately, cooperation that led to this law enforcement use by the Chinese side, essentially, to go after a very effective and very important business partner for the North Koreans. And we're not talking about dual-use suspect components. She was buying and sending over uranium enrichment material and tubes that went into North Korea's highly enriched uranium weapons program. So there was no doubt in terms of what function she was serving. But the interesting thing about it from the business sense is that she did a lot of her business with the North Koreans on credit. So it gives you a sense of a very sophisticated business partnership. There has to be a certain aspect of trust and this expectation you're going to be paid a year, 2, 3 years down the road. But the fact that she did this and made a lot of money off of the North Koreans, the two things that come out is that this is an example of a very sophisticated, normal business arrangement. Number two is the North Koreans were more than able to pay for the elevated commission fees and the other high price tag for the items that she sold them. And so the notion that you know, the North Koreans are getting this money from somewhere. You know, for me, it's the direction arrow that the North Koreans amassed a lot of money from the coal trade in the second half of the 2000s, and those large slush funds are in-house on the mainland in China. So the efforts now to block North Korea's ability to make revenue, to make money to finance their program, I think it's too little too late.
Edith Terry, former journalist. I used to cover Korea. So for, I don't know, at least since the early 1990s when Bill Perry was defense secretary and the first, you know, question of whether there could be a surgical strike against North Korea came up. There's been this notion that the North Koreans would hit back at Seoul and devastate Seoul because they have all these artillery tubes lined up across the border. But going back to Ted's question about sentiment, why would the North Koreans hit the South Koreans before they hit Japan? And what's stopping them from, you know, like organizing a first reaction against Japan? I mean, to me, that's a lot. And then, you know, sort of if you look at that, how that plays out, it's a direct strike against a U.S. proxy. China has reasons not to be as upset. The South Koreans are perhaps brought back into the fold, a more Sinocentric fold. I mean, how is that kind of war game? Is that kind of scenario being, you know, looked at the moment?
So I evaluated through the lens of the events that happened in 2010. In the latter part of 2010, there was an artillery exchange between the U.S., the South Koreans, and the North Koreans. And the way that the events happened, there was the exchange, and then the South Koreans basically saying they are going to finish their artillery exercise. And that created this incredible tension. And the North Koreans threatening, if you dare do that again, then the gloves come off. I think the important lesson learned there is the Chinese freaked out. You know, so Dai Bingguo, the state councilor at the time, hopped on a plane, went to Seoul. And the story is that from Incheon Airport, he calls the Blue House and says, I need a meeting with the president. That is not Chinese standard behavior. So the fact that you have this urgent diplomatic shuttle diplomacy and that Dai Bingguo then goes to Pyongyang, who knows what was said. Different people are claiming credit for it. Governor Richardson had, you know, by chance been in Pyongyang at that time. He was there with Wolf Blitzer. And, you know, Governor Richardson thinks that he pulled off essentially the escalation of fighting. But I think lesson learned from the North Korean side is that if you get up to the level of escalation, the Chinese are going to come in and literally douse everything so it doesn't escalate further. So if you think like a bar fight situation, you become really bold when someone's holding you back. And so if North Korea has that embedded in their mind's eye, then it would be a limited exchange in the sense of retaliation, but a North Korean hope that the Chinese will come in and restrain everyone, not come in and join forces with the South Koreans and the United States. So that part of it, I think, is also kind of a part of North Korean behavior. So the 1962 Mutual Defense Treaty, the Chinese have been very clear that that's no longer valid, although it still exists on paper. And that was a Chinese effort to make sure the North Koreans understood that they couldn't drag China into a war if the North Koreans started something. So they were trying to prevent North Korea from engaging in adventurism militarily with the United States. So after that period, and this is around the Hu Jintao period, the North Koreans start using more and moving their facilities near the border with China. So if there is a U.S. military strike, those U.S. military assets will have to go very close to the Chinese border and in some areas go into Chinese airspace. So that's a part, I think, of the North Korean calculation that they want to create a situation where they drag the Chinese into it, but not for the sake of the Chinese dragged in and fighting on their behalf or joining forces with the United States, but literally as the peacekeeper. Now that's a gamble too. So if that really plays out that way, then, you know, bravo for North Korea. But if it doesn't, that'll be a horrible miscalculation.
You know, both China and Russia have nuclear, ballistic, intercontinental missile. How do you assess the risks of North Korea hitting the U.S. versus China and Russia? Is it just because North Korea is a small country and you don't want them to be in this nuclear intercontinental, sort of family? And also, even if North Korea have this missile, what's the likelihood of them hitting the U.S.? It must be extremely small. So are we making a small thing into a big thing?
Sure. I mean, there are some technical experts saying that as much progress as the North Koreans have made, they're still not there yet. But it's the momentum of their development that is the big concern, in the sense, again, the window of time closing. But, to your point, the continental United States is a big target. So it's not a function of hitting the target, the city that they've declared. Anything in the continental United States is a huge scandal and a huge crisis. That's a violation of U.S. territorial integrity. But to your point, between the United States and China and the United States and Russia, there's something called strategic stability, the understanding that using nuclear weapons will invite nuclear annihilation for both, so mutually assured destruction.
It must be clear for North Korea too. It must be.
So your point is shared by some of the analysts who've been looking at the situation. They're saying to the United States too, don't overreact. Kim Jong Un isn't suicidal. He's not crazy. But again, my point is, who in the American leadership structure will take that gamble and say, oh, you know what, we'll wait and see, and there's a good chance he's not going to be suicidal and we can coexist with a nuclear North Korea. A young, unknown kid, no one really knows his thinking or his behavior, who's 33 years old, who is in charge of a country of about a little over 20 million, that has food insecurity problems. A number of these things are a source of concern. But if you play it out, even if he is at that category where he's not going to be suicidal and launch it at the United States, there's also a South Korean concern that a nuclear North Korea will bully South Korea, that will launch limited conventional attacks with the belief of who dare would it retaliate against a nuclear weapon state. So that was the language that North Korea used in the artillery exchange in 2010. That was at a stage where it wasn't as developed as it is now. There, the belief was North Korea was delusional, that it thought itself as a nuclear weapon state when it really wasn't. But that pattern of behavior kind of fits this concern in another area as well.
Okay, Dr. Park, can I ask? Okay, one at the back. Yeah.
Hello, Vivian McGrath. Given you say that there's a boy running North Korea and there's a toddler in the White House whose level of foreign policy is probably less than a kindergarten child, how much does that actually inflame that state of emergency and escalate the risk factor?
So the labeling of North Korea and Kim Jong Un as a boy is something that I think is universally used in China, in Chinese circles, and now among some of the military leadership in Washington as well. So the way that they say is this kid with nuclear weapons, and you're going to hear more of that going forward. But in the case of the United States, we're looking at institutions. These are very durable institutions. Domestically, the judiciary has been the saving grace. But the layers of institutions give you a sense of confidence that there's something of a buffer, and the group of these professional, retired and serving generals are tested. They're combat generals. In the case of North Korea, our understanding of their institutions, no one really knows. Our understanding of Kim Jong Un, and I bring this up in all seriousness, what we know of Kim Jong Un is because of Dennis Rodman. Right? So that's the part where no one wants to take a bet in terms of whatever thinking about North Korea. That's why I think on the U.S. side, I can understand different reactions and concern. Already this pattern of behavior with the new leader in the United States, but I draw your attention to the institutions in the United States. They're extremely well developed, and they've up till now have served a very important purpose.
Okay, so we've been going for an hour now. Excuse me, if I could ask a final question, Dr. Parker.
Sure.
Why are North Korea allowing so many images and footage of their technology to be broadcast around the world? I would have thought instinctively they would want to keep it secret, or is it just purely a show of force?
I think the North Koreans have a very explicit purpose of making sure that everyone knows that this capability is real. That, again, here I'm venturing, I'm guessing, but it's almost Kim Jong Un's way of saying, I'm not using my father's playbook. I'm really going for a nuclear ICBM, and these capabilities become the basis of being treated seriously. It is unbelievable the amount of intelligence data that the North Koreans are providing. And with that, there's no speculation. So if you're going to go this rapid pace of development, and you've said you're following Pyongyang and you're using it for a minimal nuclear deterrent, this level of transparency is also unprecedented. But it is resulting in a level of seriousness that the 33-year-old kid is treated in some circles as a serious threat. So that's a part I think that will continue. And the next time they do an ICBM, watch out for the YouTube channel and see more of the details and data.
Okay. Dr. Park, thank you so much for your time and walking through it. A small gift from the FCC as a token of appreciation.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Inga. That's great.